What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is Legitical Response. We cover political news. We keep you up to date and keep you informed with everything that the government does, because the government's big, the government's bloated, and the government does a bad job. And we don't like it, so we got to complain about it somewhere, right? But we also like to counter the corporate press's narrative, or the mainstream narrative machine, as I love to say. They lie, they twist stories, they twist facts to make you believe one thing when it's really something totally different. But today we're talking about the government because something that we've been talking about for the past, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or so, something that I don't like a lot, and people get my opinions on this issue wrong all the damn time. For some reason, we're talking about Ukraine, but for some reason they think when I'm like, no, I don't want to send funding, blah, 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 I hate Ukraine. They think that I want Putin to win for some reason, and that's definitely not the case. I would love nothing more than to see Ukraine completely roll over and push Russia out of its borders, out of its territory, right? But I don't want to help them do that by sending billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars when we're spending that in a debt, right? We're spending that past what we make. We don't have that money. They have to borrow that money to send it over there. I don't like that whatsoever. I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be intervening in foreign conflict whatsoever. That's my position, right? Like, I don't want Putin to win. I don't want Ukraine to lose. I don't want any of those things, right? Like, I understand what Putin did. That doesn't mean I condone it. I condemn totally Russia invading Ukraine. It's totally stupid. I've said this 1,000 times. But however, since the fact that I love to talk about not spending money in a deficit to help somebody win a war, that doesn't mean I want the opposition to succeed. It's just completely ridiculous. But let's go ahead and get into the story today, because U.S. Speaker Mike Johnson may pay political price for Ukraine deal. That's right. After months of delay and increasingly dire warnings, the U.S. House of Representatives approved $61 billion in new aid to Ukraine by a comfortable margin. The passage is a big win for Ukraine, which has been desperate for new military supplies to stave off a Russian offensive that is gaining ground. The U.S. Pentagon press secretary told reporters on Thursday that U.S. military supplies, including for air defense systems and artillery units, could be moved to Ukraine in a matter of days after final approval. Saturday's rare moment of cooperation in Congress is also a cause for celebration for President Joe Biden, who has been calling for the Ukraine war a world-defining conflict that the U.S. cannot afford to shrug off. What in the hell does he mean, can't afford to shrug off? We can't afford to pay for it. We're spending this money in a deficit. What the hell is wrong with these people? Today, members of both parties in the House voted to advance our national security interests. How in the hell is funding a foreign war somewhere on the other side of the world have anything to do with our national security interests, right? Like, it has nothing to do with our national security interests. At the same time, we are being invaded on our southern border, and the only thing Joe Biden can do is Republicans need to pass legislation, which he's lying by saying that, because they already passed H.R. 2 at the beginning of the year, right? That was a very comprehensive border security bill that actually expanded asylum, expanded the beds for criminal aliens, expanded the parole, it expanded everything to do with migration. However, they didn't like it because it would force Joe Biden to re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, which, according to him, is terrible, right? Oh, that's so racist. How is that racist? It has nothing to do with the race of the individual coming into the country, because we have races from all across the world coming into this country, right? White people are coming across that border too. But it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with securing our border, which they conflate that all the time. You know, the corporate press loves to get out there and say, oh, migrants are just trying to have a better life. No, that's not who we're talking about. We love migrants. This country is built upon migration, right? We all know that. We can all see that. We all love legal migration because That's what made our country work in the first place. But what we don't like is people circumventing the rules, circumventing the laws, coming into this country illegally. They're not being vetted. They're not being searched. They're just being allowed in. Then they're given these hotel rooms and high school gyms where they can sleep in your child's gym. Right, gym class, like, no problems there, right? They're given thousands of dollars in assistance. They're given food and all this other stuff, which the food I can understand. I'm totally fine. Criminal alien coming into the country, you want to give him some food assistance, sure, whatever. However, I don't think they should be here in the first place to be able to receive food. But, that's neither here nor there. The fact that Joe Biden has allowed so many millions of criminal aliens to come into this country unvetted. Yeah, there's a lot of criminals that got through, right? We have had several instances of criminal aliens murdering people, raping children, causing all kind of damage and destruction. We've got story after story after story of border towns all across the United States, as a matter of fact, because everywhere is a border town now, because Joe Biden has been shipping migrants all over the damn place, busing them to sanctuary cities, flying them in from across the world, and then busing them all over the place. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand their motivation behind this, right? Like, are they trying to grow their voter base or something like this by having these people come in, giving them housing, giving them money, giving them food, giving them all these amenities and all this other stuff? Like, what are they really trying to do here, right? Like, and we see in Democrat cities that some of these people, they're trying to pass laws to allow them to vote in local elections, right? Like, they're barred from voting in federal elections, but does that mean they don't have a say in the election? No, that doesn't mean that at all, because these people get counted on the census, right? Like, I'm not going to get into all that because we're trying to talk about this, but let's keep going. The president could sign the aid into law later this week, as the U.S. Senate is expected to approve the House foreign aid package, which also includes funding for Israel and Taiwan, as early as Tuesday. Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson also has a reason to be encouraged by the result. It was his change of heart on Ukraine support from a reticence to active support that proved the decisive factor in getting the foreign aid package approved. Like that was a warning sign to me, if you will. So a bunch of red flags went up with that. Like, okay, Mike Johnson was totally against this Ukraine aid, like totally against funding foreign war. He was talking about it. He was speaking out. He wasn't passionate about it, but he was like, where's the end goal for this? What's the plan in Ukraine? And he's still saying these things, but he was totally against it. He didn't want to continue to fund this thing, right? Like, the initial funding of this thing, was okay. I was like, Putin's an evil dictator for invading. We'll send some money over there. We'll send some tanks and some bullets and all this other stuff. Whatever. Fine. But the continuation of this, just continuing to send money after billions after billions after billions of dollars, just doesn't make any sense anymore, right? But Mike Johnson was against this. And then all of a sudden, he gets put into the speakership, right? Like a little bit after this, all of a sudden he changes his mind. Now he's all for it. Huh? That doesn't make any sense. People don't just change their mind on a dime like that. They don't, I'm going to vote for this on a whim. Right? Like, no, that doesn't happen. You don't just change your mind like one day you're sitting there like, oh yeah, I'm a dude, man. I'm a manly dude. And then all of a sudden, I think I'm going to be a woman. No, that doesn't just happen like that, right? So something fishy was going on with that. That's all I'm saying. I don't know what the hell it is, but something fishy is up with Mike Johnson, right? Like with FISA. They just approved FISA, right? Like literally, Joe Biden just signed that into law. So, hey, I'm probably being spied on just like you. You're probably being spied on too. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. I don't like giving the government more power, though. Will it affect me? I have no idea. They're not supposed to spy on Americans. But warrantless spying, yeah, that's scary to me. But let's keep going. Mr. Johnson may still pay a political price for Saturday's achievements. However, he relied heavily on Democrat support, not just on the final vote, but to clear procedural hurdles leading up to those votes. Yeah, he suspended the rules once again to get the vote across, not giving the legislators enough time to read over all the legislation. But, they do that all the time. It's a dirty trick. But whatever, what can you do about that, right? Like the lobbyists were like, yeah, get this through, and Mike Johnson just jumped. And so whatever, what can you do about that? His decision to turn to Democrats was necessitated by intense resistance among a handful of Republicans, some in key positions of power in the House, who opposed any new aid to Ukraine. Now those Republicans may force a vote on whether to oust Mr. Johnson from the Speaker's chair. In remarks to the press after passage of the foreign aid bill, Mr. Johnson defended his actions and said he was not walking around the halls of Congress worrying about being removed from power. I've done here what I believe to be the right thing, he said. While a move to trigger his ouster did not come on Saturday, 3 Republicans have come forward to call Mr. Johnson's removal, and they say more will join them in the coming days as the House breaks for a week-long recess. I'm actually going to let my colleagues go home and hear from their constituents, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, who drafted a resolution to remove Mr. Johnson weeks ago, said after the foreign aid package was approved. Public opinion polls have shown many Republican voters souring on additional aid to Ukraine, even as Democrats and independents support American help in the war effort. Yeah, that's because the corporate press is getting up there and lying to them, and it's all a bunch of BS, right? Like, apparently, if you don't want to fund war, if you don't want to fund this thing, you're somehow in bed with Putin. Makes no sense whatsoever. If a removal vote does come, some Democrats have expressed a willingness to back the Speaker, essentially rewarding him for standing up to members of his own party to ensure Ukraine aid, a high priority for Democrats, and the Biden White House cleared the House. That could give Mr. Johnson a short-term lease on political power, but it's difficult to imagine how a Republican Speaker can reliably count on ongoing Democrat support. Exactly. While there was overwhelming bipartisan backing for this foreign aid package, at some point Mr. Johnson will push legislation on an issue that angers Democrats. If his Republican critics make another move, then he may find his former allies across the aisle are much less willing to throw him a lifeline. Yeah, that's not a good idea, depending on Democrats, to keep yourself in your position that you are when you're a Republican, because the Democrats are crazy. They're all about abortion rights, a woman's right to choose, which means killing your child. They're all about gender-affirming care and all this other stuff, right? Which really means you're sterilizing your kid and you're changing their sex, or you're wanting to change their sex, their quote-unquote gender identity. But there's no actual difference, right? Like, reality, they'll still be whatever sex they were born as, because you can't really change that. But all outward appearances would appear that there's something totally different, right? Like, why would you want to do that? Oh, you're affirming their delusion. No, you can't affirm somebody's delusion, right? Like, we don't do that with anything else, right? Like any other mental issue that we have, we don't affirm that. Like paranoid schizophrenia, for example. You don't go and tell a paranoid schizophrenic that, yes, your toaster wants to kill you. No, we don't do that. That is insane. So how come gender-affirming care is you're a bigot if you don't want to trans your kid? Like, what? That makes no sense. All right? When you got desistance rates are, really high, and then on the other end of that spectrum, suicide rates are really high. So which one would you rather? Desistance rate, which if you don't do nothing, if you don't trans your kid and you just tell them to shut up, then they'll go back to just being a normal kid, right? On the other side, if you affirm their delusions, now they have a 40 to 50% chance of killing themselves. Which is the better choice there? You let me know down in the comments section. For now, however, Mr. Johnson can savor a hard-fought victory. His strategy to break the aid package into individual components on Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and to face down his Republican opponents who openly defied him, worked largely as planned. And, honestly, I wish they would do this with everything, right? Like, break all this stuff up. Why put all this stuff into one giant package? Yeah, because they want to get earmarks through. All this pork, all this BS, right? Like, I've played those videos before of all this stuff that we're spending money on. Just dumb stuff. Like, $1.5 million to encourage video gaming in New York. Makes no sense. How about let's give $1 million to Martha's Vineyard Hospital? right? Like the richest, area in the United States, the federal government is giving $1 million to that, right? Let's see if quails, are more sexually active when you give them cocaine. Stuff like that. Like, why are we spending money on this crap? But they throw these earmarks in there, right? And that it blows my mind that people go for this stuff, right? And the corporate press doesn't ever push back on any of these things. None of these things. You never hear the corporate press. That's my whole reason for existence, right? Like earmarks and all that BS was the reason I wanted to get on YouTube and tell as many people as I can that this is what your government is spending your hard-earned tax dollars on. In his remarks after the votes, he said the legislation was not perfect and that it was not a blank check. You like how they wrote, they spelled check right there? A reflection that recent months have shown there are clear and growing limits to U.S. support. He said new aid must be monitored and ensure that it is being spent wisely, and Ukraine must find an in-game strategy for the war. But he stood by the path he took to arrive at Saturday's results. And, this is something that I will say, if they were going to pass this Ukraine aid, I hope the Senate passes it with no amendments. If it passes, okay, because it essentially forces the Biden administration to come up with some sort of strategy, right? Like, that's been one of my big gripes from this whole time. There's no end game here. Like, how is Ukraine gonna win, right? Like, how do you think that Ukraine is actually gonna push Russia out of its own country? I would love to know how they're going to strategize that. How do they think that Ukraine can actually do this? I wanted to know that, right? Because if you look at the numbers, you look at the situation on the ground, it doesn't look like a winning bet. That's why I've been against this thing. I don't like my money to fund war. That's number one. Number two, the odds that Ukraine can actually push Russia out of its own country are very, very low. Number three, Ukraine is not some shining democracy on the hill that we should be defending, right? Like the corporate press and the mainstream media have tried to portray like, oh, they're freedom fighters. They're fighting for their freedom. It's democracy. We've got to save democracy all across the world, right? But they're not giving you the whole truth. They don't tell you that, no, Ukraine's not a democracy. They are a very corrupt nation. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden helped get a prosecutor fired from there who was actually trying to eliminate some of that corruption, right? Like, so Joe Biden is propping up the corrupt regime that is the Zelensky regime in Ukraine, right? So when you start looking at all these factors, you can kind of see that, hey, look, I don't like spending money on this. This is what I don't want to spend money on. A corrupt nation that just so happened to get invaded by Russia. Like I said at the beginning, I really don't want Russia to win. What I really want is for them to stop fighting and come to some sort of agreement somehow. I don't know how. I don't have the answers for that. I wish I did. I could give you an answer, right? Like, hey, Putin, just leave, right? Work out some sort of a deal, maybe some stretch of highway that Putin can use and access freely so he can get to Crimea. How about that, right? But we're not going to get that whatsoever because all of our ambassadors and all of our foreign policy politicians, they're like, oh, we're going to fight Russia till the bloody end. Right? Which would mean World War III, which would mean nukes start flying. Because as soon as NATO gets involved in this thing, Russia's going to mobilize 100% of its army to stop that from happening because we're going to start pushing into Russia. And once we start pushing into Russia and running over its forces, because that will most certainly happen, because once the United States mobilizes everything into Europe and starts fighting against Russia, they're going to be like, holy crap, this is for real. I'm gone. Those conscripts aren't going to want to go up against the United States military because they're going to get ran the hell over, right? Nobody wants that. So once they start getting ran the hell over, what is Putin going to do? He'll probably start off with a couple of tactical nukes. And it just escalates further and further from that point until the entire northern hemisphere is in ruins and all destroyed. That's what I want to prevent. That's what I don't want to happen. So, like I said, I don't have any solutions to get Russia out of Ukraine. That's what I would like, for Putin to just stop. Hey, look, let me use this highway and we're good. I would be fine with that. But however, our leaders are like, no whatsoever. We're not stopping until Putin is dead, I guess. They want to kill all the Russians. I don't want that. I think that's a dumb idea. I don't know why we all can't just get along, right? Like, there was a brief period where right after Trump came out of office, you had the debacle that was the Afghanistan retreat. Because that's what it was. We were retreating, we were getting our ass kicked, and we had a brief period of no wars. And then all of a sudden, Putin invades Ukraine, and by God, we probably allowed that to happen. Joe Biden probably wanted that to happen, because he didn't do anything to stop it. All he did was get on TV and say, don't. You better not do it. We're going to put sanctions on you. Right? Like, sanctions? Really? Makes no sense. Makes absolutely no sense to me. But I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comments section. Do y'all agree with the foreign aid bill that was just passed? Do y'all think we should be sending $61 billion, in a deficit, by the way, to Ukraine to help them kill Russians and get killed by Russians? Let me know what you think down in the comment section. And that's all I got for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. And stay legitical. Peace.